E911 Talk podcast, episode 66, for Monday, January 16, 2012.
Welcome to this edition of E911 Talk with your host, Mark Fletcher, product line manager for emergency services at Avaya. Now, here's Fletch.
Last week, I had a discussion with a longtime listener who was just about at his wit's end over managing his E911 environment. It seems with the implementation of some new call server equipment that was servicing 4 buildings with thousands and thousands of users, it turns out that he's spending about 7 hours a week managing the location information from MacWork on IP telephone moves just for E911 compliance. Now, if you estimate an average loaded labor rate of $75 an hour, which is probably low, that extra work for E911 adds up to $525 each week, or over $27,000 annually. Now, to make matters even worse, that facility happens to be one that is heavily guarded, and no one is permitted inside without a security escort, including emergency first responders. This brings me to the topic of this week's podcast and blog, emergency response zone sizing. Now, I've often said that one of the first things that you need to look at when you're doing an E911 remediation project is the size of the emergency response location, or ERL, which is the granularity that you're providing to the PSAP. But another level of granularity that you need to look at closely is the level of granularity you provide to your local internal first responders or security staff. It doesn't have to be the same as the granularity level you provide to the PSAP. When looking at the size of ERLs, it's common for people to think that the more granular you can be on your E911 solution, the better it is. Now, although that sounds like it makes sense, it actually may not be the best granularity of reporting. Now, just like a street address of 211 Mount Airy Road in Basking Ridge, New Jersey, is far too large of an area to isolate a specific caller, adding cubicle 3C239 to that address actually does very little for public safety responding. Internally, that cubicle number is very descriptive to security as well as most employees within the building. Heck, even though I'm not a regular visitor, I know that that's the 3rd floor, center section, and based upon signage, I could probably quickly find cube 239. But chances are that the public safety official that's responding to an incident has never been in the building before, and 3C239 means very little to them. Also, they don't carry cube-level floor plans with them, and quite frankly, when the fire truck or ambulance pulls out of the garage, your cube number is really extraneous information at that point in time. Now, don't get me wrong. Knowing exactly where someone is in the building is valuable information, but when and how we get that information to first responders is really what we need to be concerned about. So let's step back a little bit and think about granularity, both internally and externally. If you've been following the E911 best practices that we've been talking about, you'll know that the NENA MLTS model legislation recommends that fire alarm zones are good starting points when establishing ERLs for 911. We specifically say starting points because every building is different and you need to take into consideration many different things. But fire alarm zones usually do, and coupled with zone-level granularity to public safety, we always recommend some level of on-site notification, or OSN, to go along with that. If you have a staff security position within your building, providing that individual with specific information about 911 calls that occur in the building is pretty much a simple task, and one that can certainly expedite emergency response. Think about the Gaithersburg incident from years ago where they went to the right address, but there were multiple buildings, and the receptionist had no idea that a 911 call took place. When someone in a building needs help, quite often, local internal first responders can provide that immediate assistance while waiting for public safety to get on scene. But one thing I get asked all the time is, what if I don't staff my facility with a centralized security desk, or I typically have people working after hours, yet I only have a receptionist in place during the day? Again, the answer to this is simple and solved by some relatively low-cost technology and a little common sense. Now, the last time I was in a large discount store, a brand new LED 40-inch flat-screen television went for under $300. Now, in addition to providing high-definition video connections, most of those TVs today have a VGA input on the back that'll accept an output from a PC. Looking at some of the common OSN applications that are available today, most of them provide some mechanism for displaying maps and other relevant information on computer displays of interested parties. In most commercial buildings, it's actually common to have a central fire alarm panel. The fire department knows that when a fire alarm is activated, one of the tasks of the fireman responding is to go to that panel to identify which sensors have been activated. That provides them with the approximate position of the emergency, and similarly, if we start making E911 displays common in buildings, the exact location of the caller could be easily conveyed to public safety upon their arrival, no matter what time of day it is or what we have for security staffing. Let's think about that for a second. Today we get so wrapped up with knowing and tracking the exact location of an E911 caller at the time they make their 911 call. Now obviously, this sounds like a great idea, but let's think about that a little bit. If I can provide information externally to public safety that gets them to the general area of where I am, while at the same time providing internal employees precise information of where I am, I reduce or eliminate the complexity of maintaining that external database in the carrier network that I have to pay for or track updates that are not even real time. Updating internal databases, ones that the enterprise has full control of, and then making that information available to internal first responders and to public safety responders in the form of a wall display dedicated for that purpose is a much better use of financial resources. Not to mention that it provides a much more efficient environment for the 911 caller, as well as the public safety emergency responders. From an enterprise perspective, E911 can now become a one-time remediation effort, effectively eliminating the ongoing maintenance at the user level. Establishing URLs one time within an enterprise environment and then coupling that with detailed OSN capabilities, administrators can immediately fix the 911 problem that exists in large campuses with multiple buildings or large buildings with multiple floors. Now again, don't get me wrong. Providing public safety with precise information about location is always at the top of my list. But if I have to spend $80,000 or more to do that, and information can quickly become irrelevant and outdated, or I have no way of conveying it to public safety in a real-time manner at an acceptable cost, let's face it, enterprises are not going to deploy it. If they do deploy it, it's going to become a challenge to maintain it. And if it's a challenge to maintain it, I can guarantee that somebody paying the bills for the labor to maintain that information is going to redirect the priorities of that individual as they try to manage costs of maintenance and overhead. We see it happening every day. I think we too often lose sight of the problem. The problem is that callers behind an MLTS PBX quite often send out only a main billing number or the number of a facility that they're not even located in. If the mechanism that we use to fix that problem is too complex, too expensive, or too inaccurate to provide first responders with the information that they need, it's not going to be used, or it's not going to be used properly. Remember the old adage, garbage in, garbage out. Thinking about that problem logically, E911 in the enterprise can really be a simple problem to fix. If you overthink the problem, the solution is going to end up being too complex, and chances are you'll be doing more harm than good.
You've been listening to the E911 Talk podcast with your host, Mark Fletcher, product line manager for emergency services at Avaya. E911 Talk is a weekly podcast available on sites like this, as well as iTunes, and is available free of charge. If you have any comments or questions, you can email Fletch at fletcherm@avaya.com. That's Fletcher, the letter M, at avaya.com. Be sure to listen in next week for more informative topics on E911.